Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Rig Crafting. I'm the Rig Crafting Dad, and in this episode we are going to build a new PC and we're going to stuff it inside a small ITX size 3D printed case. So I've got all the pieces that we're going to use both for our PC components and the case itself, and we're going to get started and put this all together. So what components are we going to stick in our ITX build? Well, let's first start with the motherboard. For this build I chose the GigaByte A520. This is a pretty decent motherboard. It's a budget motherboard, but it was the right price. I got it on sale for about $110. So that's what we're going to start with. Next is the CPU. For this build I chose the AMD AM4 socket because you can get those on sale for a pretty decent price. This one is the Ryzen 5 5600G, so it does include the graphics. So in case you don't want to buy a graphics card, you could use this to play basic games. So that's the CPU I chose, and that I also got on sale for about $110. So next is memory. I chose Corsair, great decent memory. This is the DDR4, this is the 16 gig pair, and speed was 3200. So I picked that up for about $45. Next I got the power supply. For this one I'm going to go with the semi-modular. So this is the Corsair CX650M. So I picked that up for about 75 bucks. So this is what we're going to stick into it. And the size of this is going to be important with our case, and I'll talk about that later. I did buy a reverse fan. So this one actually would blow air in the opposite direction that the fan blades are going. So a little bit different, and I'll get into why I chose that. And then finally, our graphics card. This is the Zotac GeForce 1660 Super. So wanted something that I could play some decent games with, and this was a great choice. It was on sale. I got this for about 170 bucks. So let's get started, and we'll talk about the case next. All right, so we've got all the pieces to our case. These were all printed on a Creality CR10. I myself did not print these. I had a friend, he has multiple 3D printers, and was kind enough to print these for me. I do have a 3D printer, it just does not have the bed size to print all of these components. So you need a pretty large bed. I think it was 300 by 300 millimeters. So in case you don't have a bed that size, then this case is not for you. So let's get started and we'll start putting it together. For this particular build, you're going to need 4 different kinds of screws. One set is to mount the motherboard to the side panel. The other is to attach all these parts together. Another set is to attach the outer case to the rest of the case. And then finally, there are some 4 decorative screws that you'll put on top of the case. So again, I'll put all those in the description so you know exactly what sizes I used. Here's the first piece. This is where you're going to mount your motherboard, and you can see these 4 slots here is where your motherboard is going to go. You can see here I actually cut off part. This was where the power supply sits, and there was a little shelf here, and without those there you can fit a larger power supply. So with this here we're limited to 125 millimeters. Now that it's cut off, you can fit larger power supplies. So that's why that's there. So we're going to go ahead and mount our motherboard right here. We're going to place our motherboard there, and I'm using these 6 centimeter screws here and some nuts. So we're just going to attach those to where the motherboard mounting holes are. So we've got our motherboard installed, and I've tightened it down at the 4 corners. Before you tighten it down though, you want to take the back plate of this particular model, and you just want to fit it to the back of your board here, and just make sure that it's going to be flush. If your board is too far to the back, then you're not going to be able to get the back of the case on. So just be sure that you kind of dry fit that before you tighten your motherboard down. Now we're going to mount our power supply, and you've got the 2 holes here, which are going to hold the power supply on one side. Now that we've got the power supply mounted on this side panel, we're going to go ahead and connect our power connectors. And I like to do some cable management at this point because we're not going to have a whole lot of room to do any cable management later. So you can see our CPU cable is pretty long. So we're going to go ahead and plug it in. And then I'm going to use some cable ties, and I'm actually going to attach it here to the underside of the motherboard mounting holes to hold it. That way it's tucked out of the way and is not going to be in our way later. So you can see here I've put the cable ties underneath the mounting loops for the motherboard, and that way when we tighten them down, they'll be tight against the motherboard and they won't be in our way later. And just for some added cable management, I just looped the motherboard cable just so that it's kind of tied and keeps everything out of the way. This side panel is one of the side panels I modified myself. The window opening here was not as big in the original, and this kind of shield here was much farther up, so it was a lot harder to get in here and unplug or change any of the configuration. So I moved this down to be just in line with the PCI Express slot, and then I added the shelf on the reverse side for the power supply so that a 250 millimeter power supply can sit on that shelf. Now we're going to add the other side panel, and this is just 2 screws on the power supply, and you're done. Before we get too far along, I did want to talk about the reverse flow fan. So in this design, the case itself, there's no airflow in the front to the back. It all comes through the bottom of the case and flows up the case and out the top. So I got this reverse flow just because I thought it would be an interesting choice, and to not have the fan mounted upside down, because you will kind of see the fan through this grill. So I didn't want to see the wires and things if anybody looked into the top of the case. So I got this reverse fan so that it will draw the air up and you don't have to see the ugly underside. Now that we have our two sides on, we're going to add the top piece, which includes our fan that we installed earlier. And on each side, there are 3 screws, and obviously there are some on the other side, so we're going to go ahead and screw those in. Now we're going to install our graphics card, and I pre-bundled the cable here together just for ease of cable management, and we're going to plug it in the power supply first, just like that. And now we're going to plug the other end into the graphics card before we install it. Just like that. We're going to make sure our lock is set. And now that we've got our graphics card installed, we can install the bottom of the case. The bottom piece does have an orientation, so you can see here this little notch. This goes to the back of the case, so just make sure that when you attach the bottom, you're actually attaching in the right orientation. Now that we have our sides on, we're going to install the back plate, and this will secure our case together and we can finish up the build. I've already screwed in the power cord extension there, and so we're going to feed that through and install the back plate here. This side will be secure once we put it on our case, and so you don't have to worry about that not being flush or screwed down. We'll put those 2 screws in when we slide the case on. I did make one additional modification here. I cut down this shield here so that I could actually fit the power cord through that hole. Otherwise, you'd have to take the top off, which means unscrewing both sides, and it's just a lot of work. So I just cut this down and then I can fit the power cord through. The last step is to feed our switch and switch LEDs through the slot here and plug them into our motherboard, and then we can finish up this build. So there you have it. We've completed our build. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you liked the case. If you have some comments on the case or the build, leave those below, and I'll include a link to all the tools and parts that I use for this build. If you like this video, like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. See you in the next video.